Welcome to The Value in Why. We are not experts, we are simply average guys like anyone else out listening. What we hope is that by sharing our experiences, it will help promote thought in others to find answers in their own lives.
It's a great topic, religion.
That's not a controversial one at all.
Not at all. Well, but the thing is, it's all about the questions why, and which we both have a background where we were taken to church as children, and we had a bunch of questions. And so give me one question you had as a kid.
That's a good one. Honestly, one of the biggest questions that I had as a kid, not even really realizing it, I guess it was a question in my subconscious, was why does it work the way that they say it does? As a kid, I was baptized at, I think, 5 or 6 years old. Well, then I was baptized again at about 13, and then I was baptized again at about 18. So obviously my mind couldn't justify this process that I was told that we were supposed to follow. And so one of the biggest questions that I had in my subconscious was, okay, why? Why is it that in order for me to reach the destination that I am told I want to go to, I have to follow these footprints? And why is it that even though me accepting Christ and being baptized and things like that sets me apart from everybody else, I'm still just like everybody else? And that's just it, is that, yeah, there were things that were different about me, but what I began to realize was most of that was due to the fact that I was going to church. It wasn't really that I had this dramatic change because Christ was in me. It was because I was going to a place where I had people that I believe were like-minded, and you are who you are friends with, and therefore we all did the same things, and we believe that that made us different. But if you really look at all of us, we're all the same. And so my biggest question was why? Why does this supposedly make us different? Why does it work this way?
Yeah. So probably one of my biggest questions going to church is, okay, since I'm from the North American continent, that the major religion is Christianity. Now, if I would have been born in China, I would have been something totally different. Or in India, or in Japan. Okay? So when you start looking at these other places, Africa, wherever, the American Indians, okay, they all had different religious beliefs. And the question is, what makes this one
the right one?
The right one. Okay? Now, growing up here, I was told this was the right one. Okay? And how do you verify that? Well, you go look at the other ones. But I don't know about you, but I was always told not to, because those are other gods. You can't go look at other gods. And it's like, okay, but how am I supposed to come to a conclusion and know what I have is right if I'm sitting here with this belief? And that always bothered me in church. And I'm sure a lot of people are feeling the same thing just listening to us, going, yeah. Because it's like, okay, so how do I know I have this right? And the answer is you don't know that.
Oh, absolutely.
Not from just sitting at the pew and listening to the minister. You don't.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember, since I grew up in Arizona, there was a lot of Mormonism in that area. And at a young age, I think I was probably 10 or 11, we did a pretty big study on what the Mormons believed, and we had, guest speakers came in who, used to be Mormons and things like that, and they would teach us about it. And the interesting thing is that since then, I've looked into a little bit of Catholicism, I've looked into Freemasons, things like that, different religions, and the interesting thing is that when you do that in the church, they're all doing it from the point of view that they're right and the other religions are wrong. And so you learn about all the bad things of those religions. But kind of something that you and I have discussed here recently is, okay, well, what about the good things of other religions? All right, what about some of the truths that can be found there? I think you know as well as I do that much like some people will talk about the Bible and say, okay, well, you might not believe in all of its stories, but you have to admit that there's wisdom there. You have to admit that this is part of our history. It's written down and can be verified. Well, a lot of other religions are the same way. And I think that's a realization that you have to come to in your own mind before you can move forward and actually start finding some answers, is saying, hey, wait a minute, maybe I'm not right. I might not be wrong, but I might not be right. So I need to start taking a look at other things and saying, okay, well, what if they're right? What's some value that they have in their text? What's the thing that brings them to that religion instead of mine? And what you start doing is you start developing a greater sense of what the world actually is. You start developing a bigger picture. And I think that's really what we're both about, is just that bigger picture, is saying where did we get off on saying we have all the truth? No, I don't think we do have all the truth. I think the truth is everywhere, and that you have to be willing to admit that you don't know everything before you can start figuring things out.
Yeah. Another big question I always had going through church was, and I think many people can relate as well to this one, is, okay, we learn in Genesis that the creation was made perfect. And we like to look out and go, well, Susie died of cancer. Mm-hmm. Ashley over here has, she's blind. Mm-hmm. And you have all these other horrible things in the world. Mm-hmm. And so we look on the outside and we just go, this isn't perfect. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of death, there's war, there's all this stuff, and
famine, disease,
all this stuff. So how's it perfect? Mm-hmm. And church never gave me an answer. And the biggest question that's never asked is, when he created this, what was he trying to accomplish?
Oh, exactly.
Because without knowing that, how are you supposed to understand what perfect is?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly it, is that if you don't know where the end game is supposed to land, then how are you going to put yourselves in the judgment seat of saying, I now get to judge whether the process is sufficient or not? I have a lot of people who will talk with me and say, if God wanted us a certain way, why didn't he just create us that way? And, I've given them the analogy, well, if you go to the kitchen, you pull out, a loaf of bread and some peanut butter, and you want to make a peanut butter sandwich, even though you already know what the outcome is, you still have to put through the process of getting the bread out and getting a knife and putting the peanut butter on the bread and then putting the two pieces together, and now you have a peanut butter sandwich, which is really interesting to think about, because the biggest question I get back is, okay, well, God's all powerful, so why didn't he just skip the process? And I think the real question is not, why doesn't he have the power for it? We know he has the power for it. But the actual question is, why didn't he skip the process?
Yeah.
Because what you're leaving out by asking that question is, what about the sandwich? What did it gain through that process?
It tastes a little bit better.
Yeah.
Than just a piece of bread.
What did it gain from that process that was beneficial to the sandwich instead of skipping to the end? And I think that's really what we start to develop and uncover. I know one of the things that you hated being told in the church as much as I did was, well, we don't know, we'll just have to ask them when we die.
Yeah, it's like, when you finally get to see them, that you can have all your answers answered. Mm-hmm. Well, with the church narrative, if I don't have my answers before I die, and I go to the wrong place, and I have total separation,
then it's too late.
It's too late. Mm-hmm. And so the thing is, that never made sense either. And like you showed, there's an irritation there. It's like, really? That's
the best you got?
We're going to give up?
Yeah. No, and that's never been acceptable to me.
No, me neither. And I mean, that's part of this whole journey, is that, so many people just want you to go, hey, just be compliant and just go with the main flow. And it's like, okay, well, I can't. Mm-hmm. I'm not built that way.
No.
And it's just like, no, there's an irritation. I can't just accept that. And And so the thing is that, yeah, with the church, there's so many different narratives that just never made sense, and nobody can give you an answer. And, I mean, you go to the minister and you ask the questions, and the guy that's leading the whole thing has a degree. Everything else, still, and I was a child, still could not give me answers that I had as a child. And it really draws you a question. That
do they know as much as they think they know? Are we really as secure as we think we are? I mean, there are all kinds of questions you get from an answer like that, and that's why it never rubbed me the right way, because I would look at it and I'd be like, okay, well, then why don't we try to figure it out? And most of the time people say, well, we're not able to comprehend that, or, well, maybe we're just not meant to know. But
the interesting thing is we have a passage in the Bible that tells us to seek and we shall find and the doors will be opened.
Absolutely.
Well, what does that mean? If everybody's telling me that they're closing the doors saying, no, you can't know these things, you have to wait till you die. But you just went against what the book said. And now I got another question. Why are we going against the book?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation that I've had with people as well. The book has so many truths in it, but the problem is that we're dealing with a piece of scripture that has been, for lack of a better word, defiled over the ages. And so that's another reason why we have to look everywhere for answers, because you look at if you go into depth research on any real religion, you will find that at their roots, in history, I'm not talking about right now, I'm talking about when they were first created, at their roots, many of them believe the same things. If we're going to believe the Bible, then it tells us that our intelligence gets worse through the ages, not better. So, if I'm dealing with a book that has been not rewritten, but retranslated and reconfigured so many times, and we're just going to take that and say, okay, well, here's all the answers. I'm going, well, wait a minute. If we're getting dumber and dumber, then wouldn't I want the earliest version possible to study?
Well, and that draws to the question, okay, is it a creation model we're in, or the other belief, Big Bang? Okay. And if we are in a creation, then wouldn't it make sense the ones that were closer to the creation would know more about how it was created
and how it works
than we do today?
Oh, absolutely.
And I mean, the interesting side is when you start really diving into different ancient cultures. Okay, you got the American Indians, you got the Mayans, you got the Greeks, you got the Romans, you got the ancient Egyptians, you got different Asian cultures. When you start diving into all of those, it's interesting. They all have a creation story. They all have a flood story. And it's rather interesting because, okay, they all have that. So does the Bible. Now, what makes the Bible superior to all the rest of those?
Oh, absolutely.
And, it really draws your question. And then number two is it's very interesting because the further deep you go and go after any of this ancient culture, knowledge, whatever they had, that you tend to have those main things that are in all of them. Some form of creation story, some form of flood story, and most of them have a prediction for the end, just like the Bible does. And so they all tend to have the same narrative. Now, their names changed. Makes sense. You speak different languages everywhere. You have different interpretations of things. And what I have found very interesting, we've talked about this just a little bit, but the main difference between the West and the East with religions, that basically you have a one that is faith-based, and then the other one is more of a discipline-based. And what's very interesting to me is when you go to the Old Testament, what was that?
More of a discipline-based.
Is the discipline-based. So it's very interesting that the one we want to push on everything is the faith-based versus almost everything else
being disciplined.
Is discipline. Well, let's think about this for a second. Which one would be easier to follow? Oh, let's go with that one. That has to be the right one.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, we're not sitting here saying which one's right, which one's wrong. We're just asking the questions. And I mean, that's a very valid question.
Well, I think it goes back to what we were discussing earlier, which is that there are answers everywhere. I mean, going back to the Bible, if we know that the Bible is true, okay, well, God says that it's His will that we all be saved. And if it's His will that we all be saved, then why would He put all the answers in one spot? That doesn't make any sense. It makes sense that they would be everywhere. And then second to that is if we know that the devil exists and that he is out there trying to create a great deception, all right, well, what would be easier? Would it be easier, Tim, for me to put all the answers in one location and say, hey, let's alienate everybody else. This is the only spot where you can find the answers. Or would it be easier for me to put answers everywhere and then create a system of religions where if you look at another religion, then you are a heathen or an infidel or blasphemous by looking at another religion for answers, and you're outcast from your society? Which one do you think has a better effect?
Yep.
The better effect is to disseminate the information across the entire world, because we are created in such a way that we're separated by countries, we're separated by states, we're separated by religion, we're separated by governments, we're separated by your sports teams, your schools, you're separated by where you work, you're separated by what grade you're in, whatever the case may be. There are so many different ways to separate us that it would make more sense that if I'm out there trying to deceive people, well, I'm going to spread out the answers instead of putting them all in one spot. That doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't make sense on either side of the field. And I think that's really what we're getting at is, hey, we're not saying anybody's right, we're not saying anybody's wrong, but we're saying, is there anything wrong with asking why? Is there anything wrong with asking questions? Why is it that society has built itself in such a way that anybody who asks questions needs to go away? It's because there are answers to be found that they don't want you to know.
They don't want you sharing it with others.
No, exactly. God forbid somebody else.
Because how are you going to control people if they understand what's going on?
Oh, exactly.
You can't.
You can't, no.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and then the little bell to get notified.
And also, don't forget to like and share our content so that we can get this out there. If you guys have any questions that you want answered, or you have any suggestions for a video topic, please feel free to put that in the comments below.